All right, everybody. Excited to be here, Craig. Nice to be here with you.
Nice to be here.
My name is Jeremy Goldberg. I am the president and co-founder at League Apps, and I'm here with.
My name is Craig McGinn. I'm the director of strategic partnerships at League Apps, and I've been with the company for 5 years.
And welcome to the Future of Soccer Town Hall. We're excited to be here today, and at League Apps, we see our role as being more than just a technology company. We're really about community and about leadership, and really excited to have this conversation today. I can't help but think about a town hall like we're hosting today and not think back to COVID when we hosted about 40 of these kinds of events. Now, admittedly, I was inside of my great aunt's bedroom. There was not a stage here and a live studio audience that we'll be incorporating as well. But I think back to that COVID period of time because it was a very disruptive moment in youth sports, right? And everything came to a stop, but it was temporal. We knew we would get on the other side of it. And I think as we launch into this conversation about soccer today, the first thing I'll start by saying is that we were actually in a more disruptive moment than COVID. That when you have conversations and you examine all the things that are going on, there's so much that is changing in youth soccer, in youth sports, and in our world that we have to contend with, that we have to navigate. Whether that's the role of technology and AI, whether that's the role of investment in youth sports, as evidenced by the front page New York Times story this morning, whether it's changing competition models, evolving roles of professional leagues, the changing dynamics of parents. I probably mentioned parents twice to emphasize some of the dynamics there, the impact of NIL and changes in college and how that might affect scholarships. And all these things are swirling around, to say nothing of the broader changes and implications in our society. This is a change of disruption and change. But it's also a time of possibility, right? It's a time of possibility, especially as we think about the World Cup and on the horizon. And the opportunity to think about what youth soccer can be, the opportunity to navigate those challenges and unleash the full potential of a sport for more kids playing and for more kids to be impacted and transformed by the sport and the impact that can have. So that's the promise. And I think ultimately as we navigate these conversations, I think what we've learned most is that nobody has the answers at times of significant change, but that means all of us have the answers. So how can we be in community to share those ideas, to have that conversation, and more importantly, hear from the people that are doing the work, that the perspective of the leaders that every day are making sports happen, what's the perspective they have as well? So with that, I'm excited to be here and joined by my co-host and moderator, Craig McGinn. Craig, what do you think about as we're entering the conversation today? What excites you?
Thank you. I think what excites me, Jeremy, is, if I'm going to use a coaching phrase, right, quite often when you're working with children, and I've had the privilege of doing that over the years, is in moments, profound moments, you can either be part of the problem or part of the solution. And today is an opportunity to talk about solutions, an opportunity to kind of raise awareness around things that everybody is talking about. One of my roles at League Apps is to be very consumer facing. I get to work with and learn from and listen to people who are joining us today virtually and the people who are here present in the room. And that's a real fortunate position I'm in. But one thing that always strikes me is there's a lot of similarities. Today, we're very much focused on soccer and the evolution of the game in the US here. But a lot of other sports experience the same things. So we have a moment and an opportunity to collectively be better, raise everybody's representation of themselves, their clubs, their standards, and ultimately allow the players and the families to be beneficiaries of that great work that everybody does. So whether you're running a club, whether you're running a tournament, whether you're trying to build a platform, work in tech, right, all of those things, the more we can over communicate and learn and listen, and conceive new ideas, I think that's what elevates the game and gets us through moments of opportunity that Jeremy talked about. So thank you, everybody. Jeremy's going to do most of the talking, and I will be very, very honored to join in and give my point of view. Thank you for everybody attending today.
What I think is also great is, one of us is a soccer expert and understands it, and the other is a person who, like myself, I'm not the soccer expert, but the technology perspective of in thinking strategically about where youth soccer is and where it can be. And I think the one thing I'm struck by is the conversations you have individually. Everyone believes that, hey, there's a way that this could be better, right? No matter who you are, what stakeholder. And yet, what's that conversation that's happening more collectively together? And I'll end this introduction by just pointing out that something that's always inspired us at League Apps, which is the Nelson Mandela quote about the power of sports to change the world. The recognizing that sport is something that has such a transformative effect to bring people together, to connect people together. As we'll see later today, for those attending the Real Madrid game and watching PSG play, and Chelsea winning yesterday, like there's such an opportunity where sports can bring people together, right? It's a common language, right? It's an opportunity to transform lives and communities. And when Nelson Mandela made that quote, some people think it was about rugby, and that movie Invictus that was made about it, but he was actually talking about soccer. That when he was in jail, they allowed the political prisoners on Robben Island to form a soccer league. And it was their experience running a league that prepared them to run a country when they came out and ran that country. So soccer has immense power. Sport has immense power. That's why the stakes are so high. That's why the opportunity is so large in front of us. With that, I'm excited to bring in our first conversation, which is a conversation I had with Julie Foudy. Now, Julie Foudy needs no introduction to anyone in soccer and pretty much anyone else around the world. A World Cup champion, an Olympian champion, a commentator, and someone who runs and actually running today her own leadership academy and camp program, and also a parent who's gone through this journey herself with her daughter who will be playing college soccer as well. And what I think most amazing about Julie and why I wanted to start with this conversation is her experience in the World Cup in 1999. What was a watershed event that allowed that team to galvanize and start a conversation about women and girls in sport and in society and pay equity. It was a moment that was used really powerfully. And what Julie and I discussed is there's a similar opportunity to do that with youth soccer today. So with that, excited to share our interview with Julie Foudy. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited because we're going to talk about a future of soccer town hall. I could not think of a better person to kick off the conversation with Julie Foudy. World Cup champion, Olympic gold medalist, parent, player, advocate, commentator, and trailblazer, and someone who, when we're thinking about what the world of soccer can be, has answered that question before, and we're excited for her to answer those questions today. Julie, thank you so much for being here today. Yes, just a small question.
What can soccer be?
What can soccer be? You know what? I could have been about what the world could be, but we set the expectation one step lower. But Julie, it's amazing to have you here today. And as much as we're going to talk about what is the future of soccer and what could it be, I think I want to start with the past, because I think there's a lot to be learned from that. And especially as we anticipate a World Cup on our soil again, and people are excited about what's going on. We've got the FIFA World Cup semifinals today. You've got the Euros going on. If we could take us back to that time before in the 1990 World Cup, what do you remember most about that event? And as you think about the impact it had on soccer, how much of that was intentional? How much did you anticipate that as it was going on versus the ability to kind of look back and see it as such a watershed moment, particularly for women and girls in our society?
It was very intentional. That's what I actually, looking back, I love most about that team and the history going generation to generation of the U.S. women's national team is it always has been very intentional. That's in our fabric and in our DNA of what we do, because it was always bigger than just, oh, let's win this tournament. Clearly, you had the legacy aspect because we had never thrown a women's World Cup in the United States. FIFA at the time wanted to do it in smaller venues, keep it on the East Coast, keep it regionalized, safe. Let's just do 5,000 to 10,000 seat venues. We were like, heck no, let's go big or go home. So we did national footprint, big, large football stadiums, having no idea if we were going to fill them, but knew that this country rallies around big events and a winning team. And that was probably the first set of intentional goals we put out there is let's leave a legacy for this World Cup. But the other thing we always were thinking about back then, especially this is in the late 90s, equality in the sport in terms of participation, in terms of support, in terms of funding. We weren't necessarily fighting for equal pay. We were at a different level then, but we were fighting for better resources, better investment in the game, and all those things. I think it was very much for us a watershed moment. But the crazy thing is we're now seeing with women's sports, it took another 20, 25 years for that explosion to really happen. But I do see, Jeremy, then a different possibility with the World Cup now, because obviously we've reached a lot of those watershed moments we wanted to in terms of where we wanted girls to be in terms of participation and girls to be in terms of pay, and that's all fantastic. But I do think now I look at the youth sports landscape, and this is why, in fact, true story, I got involved with League Apps is because I feel like there's a lot of work to be done in that space. It's messy. It's not very tidy. It's one league over here and one division over here. And I have kids going through it at the moment and still going through it. So I have one that's off to play D1 college, and that's great. But man, was it messy. A lot of it. It's so hard to navigate as a parent, and a parent that like played the game at a very high level. It's still very hard. So I think of this World Cup as really an opportunity for us to be thinking about how do we make that pipeline better, and how do we create a system that benefits the kids at the youth level. And instead of just before, we were like, we got to create a pipeline, just that, right? And now we're thinking deeper. Okay, that pipeline is there. We have so many kids playing, which is fantastic, in so many different sports. But when we're talking soccer specific, like how do we make that pipeline to get to, how do we build it to a point where kids want to get in it instead of are afraid to, or kids want to stay in it instead of get out, as we see all the time. There's such a drop off because if you're not playing a travel team, ECNL, MLS Next by the age of 7, God forbid, right? You're done. Your career is done. So we have to figure out, and I do feel like League Apps has the capability, and other tech companies, to be able to help drive a lot of that conversation. Better coaches, more women coaching, right? Encouraging young girls when they finish their careers to go back into the sports. It's going to require a lot of work and a lot of time, but I do feel that, I hope, is one of the focuses of this next World Cup and the Olympics and the Women's World Cup after that. So there's a lot of really big events for soccer coming up.
I love that, Julie. And one thing I hear you saying is it's one thing to talk about these events as something that can drive participation, particularly if you think back to 99, where there were such gaps. But then the question is, what is the quality of that participation? And if there's an opportunity to drive this kind of interest, is there an opportunity to think about that participation where youth soccer, youth sports is even better with higher standards, better experiences, less dropout? And I think some of it comes back to, and especially because there's so much that's changing in youth sports, whether it's the changing of the platforms. I know we'll talk about MLS Next today in our conversations, the rise of women's sports, and obviously the professional league. You've got the role of technology and AI. You've got a huge amount of investment capital coming in. So it's a period of change, and it allows us to ask ourselves what kind of change. I think there's a lot of questions about how those organizations are operating. What's the way to partner with them, collaborate with them, influence them, especially because sometimes there's a disconnect between the perspectives there and what happens in the grassroots. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for the top down and the bottoms up to work in concert together. And I think you've seen that. So what advice would you give for people out there that are trying to navigate a really complicated, messy world of soccer?
It's not just messy in soccer. You look at, and guaranteed you pull the top minds in every sport together, and they would say it's so complicated. It's far too expensive, right? There's too many barriers to entry. So what I think about soccer in so many ways is they have often in this country, and especially on the women's side, been at the forefront of change and progress, equal pay with the US women's national team, for example, right? Then you see other teams in other countries doing that and fighting, and it's still a long ways to go, but fighting for some of the rights that we've been afforded on the US women's national team. But what I see in the soccer space is an opportunity to set a standard for the entire ecosystem of youth sports. And yes, they're different. They all run on different models and different programs and different systems, but you have an opportunity with the groups at play and a healthier, stronger US Soccer Federation to say, can we create a model that builds out the complete person, right? That builds out the kids in a really healthy, thoughtful, developed way that they go on. Again, I think the end goal and everything of this is that they go on to be better athletes and, equally important, better human beings. And so I think with that mission in mind of the kids and how that looks for a kid that's getting into that ecosystem at whatever economic status they're at, in whatever city they're at, if we can think kid first, right? And how are we making that an experience that's good for them? Then I think we start to get on the same page on what that could look like, because I know it is messy and it's not very tidy. But I do think we have an opportunity that we should be grabbing with the biggest people who are shareholders in this, that say, let's set a system in place together that others could emulate to make youth sports in general better. And I hope soccer can lead the way in that.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point. Not only is the sport with the most participation, probably the strongest system of governance, and the biggest world's sporting event in the world taking place here. I think there's an opportunity. If you were to give a last piece of advice,
three and
three
4
major
years,
things.
yeah,
3 and 4 years,
3
right?
and 6 years, yeah.
So when we think about all this, I wonder if you're going to give a last piece of advice. If you think about there's the people out there that are listening to this, the people that are participating in this conversation are these sports organizations from around the country, and they have tremendous influence, right? They're the ones that are hiring the coaching, setting the standards, defining how they're going to work for their parents, figuring out what their values are, their programs are, how they want to operate. What is the best way to think of themselves as a change maker? How can they step into a situation that feels uncertain or feels very big for themselves, but at the same time, they have conviction that there's an opportunity to make youth soccer even better and improve it? What advice would you give to those leaders that are listening to this?
Well, I hope they'll be inspired to make some big, bold, brave moves by the fact that as they feel, which I think a lot of us do, that this doesn't feel right, that there's so much that needs to be cleaned up, that everyone at every level, whether you're a player, whether you're a coach, whether you're a parent, whether you're head of the league, whether you're sitting at US Soccer, I think there's a lot of people at every level that go, this could be better. What's stopping us, right? Like you're going to have to make some big, bold moves to actually create this change. And when you put the kid and their health and well-being and success top of mind, the whole kid, not just the athlete side, but the whole kid top of mind, then I do think that good things can come from that, because I think then it changes how you look at how are we developing coaches who are the ones who have probably the most touch points in terms of their influence of how they're teaching them, the ways in which they're teaching them. So all those things that come around the kid come into line when you put that kid first. And I just would ask them to be brave in asking for change, because everyone wants it. So who's going to step up and do it is the question. Who's brave enough to say, okay, it's time. Let's lead this for the rest of the industry, which knows it also needs a lot of change.
Julie, I think that's an amazing place to end, especially because I think there's so many people that I've spoken to in youth soccer that have leadership roles that actually point to you and the 1999 team as one of the ways a lot of women have stepped into leadership roles in what they're doing. And maybe the best way to pay it forward is not just to acknowledge the contribution you have, but to channel that bravery and channel that belief that happens. And I think, as you pointed out, as we started this conversation, when we believe there's something larger that you're going after, something that has bigger meaning, and you're inspired by that, then you work hard to that. You're willing to be brave because that vision is so compelling. You want to work towards it. And I think the vision, especially at a time of such complexity in our society, that youth soccer could be something even better, not just getting kids to play in the system, not just a system that's more inclusive to develop and advance the best players for our teams to be successful, but actually produce the most successful leaders and citizens and humans. There's an immense opportunity for soccer to lead the way. And I think in many ways follow the example of yourself. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate all that you do for all of us, and wish you the best of luck.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Well, it's always amazing to spend time with Julie Foudy, and it's also great because she sees possibility, notwithstanding the challenges. And so when we talk about, I think Julie's perspective and call for what is the opportunity for leadership? What is the way to innovate? It really sets up this next conversation. So we're going to have Ryan Miller also joined by Kyle Albrecht and Fred Lipka for this conversation, really to talk about MLS. And as at League Apps, we have the opportunity to work with lots of different professional leagues, almost all of them, and have had the opportunity now recently to start to collaborate with MLS as they've expanded to the academy division and what they've done. And what I'll give them extraordinary credit for is it's one thing to kind of see an ecosystem and see an opportunity to make it better. It's another thing to roll up your sleeves and try to do something about it. And it's an extraordinary amount of work. In many cases, sometimes they'll get the credit. In a lot of cases, people have other perspectives as well. But Fred and Kyle in particular are really with an extraordinary team leading the way and trying to try to change soccer and try to impact it in positive ways, and eager to hear their perspective as MLS is a big driver. We're also fortunate to have Ryan Miller as part of the conversation. And Ryan Miller is now a member of the League Apps team as a head of and helping to lead our soccer innovation efforts. Created an amazing tool called Mod 11 that was used by MLS Next, used by USL, and played soccer professionally within MLS. Also coached and helped lead the MLS Academy in Portland, and also helped lead the Elite Academy League. And so brings lots of different perspectives to this conversation as well. So Fred and Kyle, excited to have you here, and Ryan as well. And I'll start with you. Kyle, maybe to start with, which is, MLS is started to get more and more involved in youth soccer directly through MLS Next, through the expansion of MLS Next, MLS Go. What is driving that investment? What is driving that focus? What is MLS trying to accomplish?
Well, I think Fred should give perspective for sure from his time in the beginning of our launch of MLS Next. But the reality of each of those moments when there was, a new initiative that was put forward by the league and an intentionality with launching each of those initiatives, it was based on being solutions oriented and taking our approach, following obviously the development academy going away to provide a home for those clubs, for those MLS academies, for the elite academies to have an elite youth development platform, to be able to develop young players. And then when we look at, more recently, with the launch of MLS Go in 2023, again, that's a data-backed, research-backed approach to saying, looking at the last 20, 25 years of, recreational soccer and, the relative lack of growth when you think across the board of all of, the different areas in which the sport is growing, the investment, stadiums, training grounds, new professional teams, so on and so forth, but that, registered youth soccer participation really wasn't growing at the same, type of clip. And so, MLS wanted to be, a vehicle for, more opportunities at the recreation level. And so really, again, being more solutions oriented with providing more value with that recreational experience with the launch of MLS Go. And then more recently here, earlier this year in 2025 with the launch of our new competition tier, which obviously, as Jeremy, you just alluded to, will be the Academy division of MLS Next. That Academy division was born again out of trying to be solutions oriented, hearing from the clubs within Next and across the landscape that obviously we have a very rigorous expansion process that limits the amount of clubs traditionally that have been, able to participate in the program. That opportunity to provide more access to more players, more teams, to be able to be a part of our environments, and whether they go on and compete in MLS, they get into an MLS academy, or perhaps they just get a shot to be seen to go on and play in college. As many of those opportunities as we can provide through MLS, we want to try to deliver on. And so that's really kind of been our guiding light of how do we be solutions oriented in each of those initiatives, where people were really coming to us, to look at how can we work together from a collaborative standpoint to make it better at the club, coach, and player level. So Fred probably has more context though and background as to the early days that he was really, at the founding point of.
And Fred, and I know you definitely have perspective on all of this, but I'm, I think you have this fascinating lens because, coming from your background and understanding it from France and Europe, how player development, how those systems operated, you're then with MLS, and then you ultimately are seeing these gaps, and then you then have the opportunity with MLS Next to start to address that. So what are the gaps in the ecosystem? What's the opportunity to improve youth soccer that's really driven and motivated kind of what MLS is trying to do in youth soccer, and try to address the ecosystem, and how much of the experience you have from Europe has kind of informed the thinking behind that approach?
So whatever country you try to work in the soccer business and development, you have three main components. You have the coaching education. You have to try to improve coaching at large. You have to improve the environment, the standards, the facilities, the school aspect, the medical aspect. And you have also to improve the competition. So playing well and playing often enough is also a key aspect, a key pillar to develop better players. I would add another one in the US, which is identification and inclusion, because some of our kids are pretty much excluded from the equation. So you have to act and to try to push these four buttons to try to develop the player of tomorrow and to make our league, and I would say the country, efficient. So pragmatically speaking, we took over Next because we needed this competition component. But now we are also in a world where MLS has to be connected with the grassroots and with the good level to develop for sure player for the Pro League, but not only. It gives us also a way to influence, implement best practices at all levels in a country where I would say soccer has been built with immigration, pocket of soccer in many different cities based on the people which were playing, and now we are at the stage where everyone wants to be a part of the national scheme, competition. MLS is here, but other leagues also to drive the process, and we try to normalize. I would say best practices and the competition where I would say it wasn't maybe so organized and so visible. It's still in work in progress, and our landscape is moving every year, but we wanted to take the position of one of the leaders to try to cast a better soccer world for our clubs, our players. And when I say clubs, I don't talk about only about MLS clubs. We are now responsible for a larger amount of clubs, and we want to try to be helpful and to be useful.
Fred, as you stepped in, and there's the theory of what better player development pathways, how to improve the U.S. soccer system, and then there's the practice as now MLS is involved with MLS Next and expanding that MLS Go as well. What is the biggest learning or takeaway you've learned about the kind of impact you can have and the dynamics of the theory to the actual practice of how you're starting to improve those clubs and improve the competition and those best practices? What have you learned when you start to try to apply that through the platforms that you all lead?
I think there is a need. People are very grateful because with what we try to build, in not revolutioning anything, people are frustrated about the amount of knowledge, amount of, I would say, focus on soccer versus sometimes other aspects of the business which are important. But I would say we need to put soccer, quality of play, quality of people which teach the game at the forefront of the topic we have to solve. I think people understand that very genuinely. We try with Next to put the player in the first row of, and with him comes the coaches, and the coaches are the teacher of the game, like you are, and we are not different than a school. A club is a school, and you have to have the best teacher to allow the player to grow in the collective, within the collective aspect, but also in taking into account their own development and individual development. That's a difficulty. We have to be collective, but we have also to take the individual within the collective. And this is what is going to drive us over the next few years in Next, in what we call the homegrown academies, and the academy, Next Academy, how to have this good balance between collective, developing individual within the collective aspect.
So Kyle,
in supporting coaches and staff.
Right. And so you spoke about the opportunity around development, Kyle. So MLS was involved in MLS Next, leading this, and now choosing to expand it. What is the opportunities that you see that's driving the expansion, driving the innovation of MLS's efforts? When you think about the opportunities through all the conversations you have through clubs, through the experience of your own competitions, what opportunities do you see for youth soccer to be better, to be more impactful, that's really animating and driving kind of MLS's approach right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Fred alluded to a few of the things that, we think about in terms of, trying to have that influence within MLS Next. I heard a story, which is, I think, a good example maybe of that influence that we can have. The other day, I was talking to a state association executive director, and he was telling me about how one of the new clubs in the academy division of Next, there was a coach that, we have standards as it relates to the coaching licenses that you must have and carry to be an MLS Next. And so Fred and Louise Robles, our technical director, work closely with all of the clubs to figure out, how do we get them to the place that we need their coaches to be at. And this executive director and I had a call about, there was one coach, it's a younger coach that's like really committed to, before the season really gets underway, they want to make sure they get to that level because they're, really striving to be a younger coach on one of the academy division teams. And so that's like one small example of a coach that's making a real commitment, obviously because of their role now as part of MLS Next. That's really encouraging. We can multiply that across every, state where we have clubs and across all the coaches and collaborate. I think that spirit of collaboration is really what we're founded in terms of this expansion to MLS Next. We brought together 5 leading youth soccer operators from across the country. Unless, people, I guess there's a spirit of collaboration, but Jeremy, you alluded to at the beginning, the work. And the work actually has to happen to figure out how do we align? How do we come together? Obviously we're going to disagree on certain things. We all have to run our own separate organizations, but there's a lot more we have in common, I think, in terms of the work that's being done. Some fantastic work, by the way, across the landscape. So actually, how do we look to collaborate? And these 5 kind of leading, youth soccer operators came with that same spirit of collaboration to align and say, okay, how do we make it better? Going back to Fred's point, from a coaching education standpoint, from a player development standpoint, how do we utilize the tools that we have as MLS to bring that influence across the landscape, alongside of other, great youth soccer operators that are out there doing great work. And I think if we come at it with that mentality, you're seeing the interest, the demand that we've had just in year 1 before we've even kicked the ball in this new expanded format of Next. So I think it's super exciting for what the future holds in terms of if we can keep working together and figuring out, again, where are those touch points, where can we align and ultimately make it better for the club, the player, the coach.
Fred, one question I often sometimes you get is you see what MLS Next is doing is, well, is it working, right? So when you think about how should we think about the success of the efforts as you all continue to deepen your involvement, like what gives you confidence that it's working? How do you know? And how might you know now and how might you think about measuring or thinking about that in the future?
Well, you have different layers to try to evaluate. I don't want to talk about KPIs, but the regularly developing players which can play in MLS, being the best. Mihailovic in Colorado, developed in Chicago, went to Europe, come back and very successful. Reynolds, Pepe, Sol, but also 10 years ago, having offensive player playing as a starter in MLS at 18, 19, 20 years was difficult. Now, regularly, we play. It's not perfect. We are not at the level of the best nation yet, but we changed something. We have made a lot of progress. And also, now with our ecosystem, Next and tomorrow, the expansion, we kind of have a seamless way to communicate and to collaborate when it was more, we had more friction. Now the clubs which are in Next are partners. They also get the benefit of our success, the kids, but also the leagues, the events which we organize and they can be a part of. So it's a symbiotic approach. Instead of dividing, we try to create a community of club where I would say everyone find a good reason. Soccer is the first one to be a part of our MLS, I would say, landscape. So you can evaluate at the top, but you can evaluate also a lot of players move from one club to the others. We created a grant program to try to reward our clubs. And I would say our clubs are pretty happy because I think they have the sentiment to be a part of something and something which is, I am not American, but American, domestic, and the country takes its own responsibility. We take our responsibility to build what we think a better, not perfect, but a better soccer system.
Well, speaking about this idea of the kind of pride, American pride, I'll bring in Ryan Miller to the conversation because when I met Ryan, we were talking about potentially being part of League Apps. I said, "What's your goal?" Most people is like, "Oh, here's my goal. I want to advance. I want this kind of role. I want this." He's like, "I want the U.S. men to win a World Cup. Like that's my goal, right? I want to be part of something or part of a change that's driving that." And Ryan, you've had lots of different perspectives: player, academy director, technology, commissioner. when you look at what MLS Next is doing, and you think about the dynamics and landscape, what do you think is the opportunity there to improve that player pathway? And as you think about your own experience and the opportunity to make it better, how should we think about the role that MLS has and the impact it can have and the promise it can have from the different experiences you have?
Yeah, no. I think the shortest way to that answer is really looking at the growth of Major League Soccer on a world stage. I think it's been incredible. I think back to when I was a player growing up, and Kyle can resonate here because we're about the same age. But we could barely see soccer on TV. Growing up, and now maybe I'm a little bit more influenced being in South Florida. Like we're watching Lionel Messi, play on a week to week basis. So Major League Soccer, I mean, it provides the dream, right? It provides the dream for all the the young inspiring athletes or soccer players. But I think what's maybe also more important in my mind is the investment being put in, on the club level. You touch on, and I have personal experience in the academy space, and the evolution from, say 2010 to where we are now. There's some amazing people doing amazing work, developing humans, developing players. And I think from an education perspective, I know Fred, he's modest, but Fred's put, coaching education on his shoulders in a way, in a lot of sense. And there's others doing great work like Didier Chambron at US Soccer. But ultimately that comes down to, improving the environments for these players to, again, circle back to the dream that MLS is creating for them. So, I think there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes from some amazing people, but ultimately we see the impacts on the youth national teams. We see the impact on the size of the senior team, and I know speaking to a lot of the academy directors out there, you see the impact on international scouts, for example, on young athletes, right? So it's just ever growing, and it's exciting to see.
I'm going to ask each of you. We're going to get away on this conversation with one sentence answer. I have this post I'm putting up on LinkedIn today about Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Probably dating myself. You can go to the past or you can go to the future. So a little future casting here, right? We're a year from now or a year after the World Cup. We're thinking in the future. When you think about what youth soccer can be, especially as you think about what MLS is doing, what excites you? What's that vision? What's the one sentence way of describing what you hope and believe can be possible about U.S. soccer, and in particular the impact MLS is having? I'll go to you, Ryan, first, and then have Kyle and Fred wrap.
Oh man, that's a really good question, Jeremy. I'm gonna go back to you. I love your perspective on this from a holistic side of things. The concept of having kids LinkedIn profile or eventual adults, right? LinkedIn profiles on their club pages, just showing the incredible work that people are doing at the club level to develop a human, a professional in any way. And I think the better the work goes in there and the more the work, the better the soccer country we become as well. But I love it. There's some amazing work being done to better the kids that are in each environment. So
Al, what's your future cast here? When you think about, after all the work that MLS is putting in, we're looking a year out from the World Cup. What do you think youth soccer can be, hopefully because of MLS's impact?
Well, hopefully, if we haven't won a World Cup, we're closer to winning one for sure. But look, I think there is so much optionality out there in the youth soccer space. So many people doing great work, to Ryan's point. I think in a future state, hopefully not too far away, because of the great work, people coming together, because of the programming that we're able to create, that every player, every family in the country has an opportunity to have a great youth soccer experience, whatever they're seeking to achieve, whether that's just getting started in the game through MLS Go, wearing an MLS Go, club branded uniform and just trying to have fun and learn about soccer, or going and playing at an MLS academy. with the future goal of playing in the first team at one of our clubs or in the national team. I think everybody having that option, wherever they live, whatever, their experience is, would be a great future state that we could, try to seek to achieve.
Fred, what's your wish? I don't know if you want the U.S. to win the World Cup necessarily. You might have to answer that.
With MLS and I would say what we try to build is to, I would say, having consistency and project the US, the nation, this big country in a kind of time, 15, 20 years window where we can say we are going to be a part of the discussion and to compete against the best nations. Maybe not short term ultimately, even if we hope so, but as a league, as a national team, to be considered like in a top 5, top 6, top 7, top 8, when for now it's very difficult to enter for different reasons. But we are at the point where we are not quite there, but we see that with the work we are doing all together, I think it's ambitious, but it's possible in a 10 years horizon to see the US integrating this very short, very small group of nations. So and making this sport, I would say, which is popular, visible, more visible, to compete against the most successful sport also in the US. I think it's possible. I can see an invisible and underground river going, and I would say it's visible because we have a very young fan base and the sport is growing, I think. But it has multifaceted. But being a part of the international concert is a big part to be successful, because this is what drives the success at the youngest level.
I love that, and I love the fact that as we start to think about the future of soccer, we progress this conversation. It could have the visible effect of the success at the top level, but also, as you're saying, Ryan, the transformative effect that just playing soccer has on everyone's lives, right? And that idea that instead of just having your D1, D2 commits on your pages that highlights all the success, what's the LinkedIn profile of every one of your alumni that may turn into a Kyle Albrecht that is now at MLS, or Ryan Miller, and what they're able to do, or Craig McGinn. So Kyle, Fred, Ryan, thank you so much for being part of the conversation today, and excited to continue to watch all the great stuff MLS is doing, and certainly privileged to be part of that as well. So thank you all very much. And as we evolve the conversation, Craig,
yes.
I think we're hearing perspectives, at different levels. Julie, MLS, and we want to start to bring in really an operator perspective, because people doing the work on the ground. There's a lot to learn and perspectives here. And I wanted to start by bringing in the perspective of some of the operators running some of the competition platforms, which I've learned more and more as you learn about soccer, the importance that those platforms have. And Kyle mentioned the expansion of MLS Next to the Academy Division. And there's some operators that raised their hand and said, hey, we'll figure out how to collaborate together and what that looks like. So excited to have Roderick from here and representing Three Step and was formerly EDP, Noah Gins from the Elite Academy League, also from Albion, and then Marley Wilson from Cal North, and also all of them are operators within this kind of MLS expansion. And I want to start, maybe I'll put you on the spot, Andy, to begin with, and appreciate you being here. And Craig's known you for a long while as well, so he'll jump into the conversation too. But jumping in to partner with the professional league, particularly giving up some of the things that you might have been doing today in this direction, required some notion of some reason for why that's the case, why you take that leap, some belief about what youth soccer can be, where it was going. So what was the perspective you had, given all the great work you've done with NAL and others, to kind of be part of this MLS Next effort?
Yeah, I think Kyle spoke to it well, actually. Basically, collaboration to try and make something that already existed even better. I think ultimately, look, the other operators that we work with, a big part of it for us is we have the privilege of working with good people. And it is a privilege. We have a choice of who we choose to work with. The other operators have been fantastic. You got Marley, you got Noah, you got Brent, you got Dan, and all of us genuinely want to try and shine the spotlight on improvements as MLS Next expands. we're all doing good work in our own silos, if you like, in our own businesses, and that's fine. That'll continue. But I think for us, it was the opportunity to keep working with a regional focus as well as we can. We have a great team behind us. I personally am the spokesperson. I am not the team. The team are way more talented than me, candidly. Brendan, Evan, Warren, Ian, the team behind us are fantastic. But ultimately, if we can work regionally, but collectively with other operators, have a national impact, that appealed to us. Genuinely, we thought we could have a national impact, but we're not going to do it on our own. I don't think anybody can do it on their own. And the best vehicle for doing this, candidly, and Fred spoke about it, and Kyle spoke about it, Ryan spoke about it, MLS Next are doing something good. It's going to keep getting better, and it's going to be more inclusive for players, coaches, and referees, by the way, because those are all the development areas we think we can positively impact. So for me, collaboration where the greater good is more than we could accomplish on our own, very simply.
Noah, to bring in the conversation, when you know, and he talks about collaboration, one thing that I've appreciated getting to know you and all the work that you're doing through the various platforms you're part of is really a vision of innovation, right? Whatever it is today will look different tomorrow and keep on changing. So when we think about the evolution of competition platforms, right, how should, you know, as folks are trying to make sense of this, right, and you have expansion, you have changes, it's across the landscape, what do you think is driving that innovation or those evolution? And what is the perspective you have from an Elite Academy League that also drove your kind of involvement with MLS here?
Yeah, I think it has all to do with supporting the clubs and their development and their ambitions to improve. You know, the leagues, the platforms nationally are driving higher standards. They're driving, they're bringing innovation to the table. And I think as that happens, clubs are getting better. It's a competitive advantage in the marketplace for clubs. So clubs want to be part of it. It helps them perform. It helps them retain. It helps them recruit. It helps develop those players. And the leagues are responsible for that. The leagues are responsible to support clubs from top to bottom and give them a pathway to make their life easier.
Marley, you know, as a state association, that's probably not a fair label to describe you and all that you're doing within Cal North. But what I think is often compelling is, you know, you're often thinking about, you know, innovation. And some people, when they think about associations or governing bodies, they think, you know, slow. They think, you know, the past. But you're someone who's really trying to really think about innovation within Cal North. So talk a little bit about what's driven your perspective here to get involved with this MLS expansion and how you see soccer and competition evolving in the U.S. that may be driving some of the strategies you guys have at Cal North.
Yeah, no, Jeremy, I think when coming to the State Association 4 years ago, the landscape has changed dramatically. And not only did it change dramatically, we have to adapt and look at how we as a state association, as an association, can continue to grow the game and serve everyone. We're not just serving competitions, we're serving the grassroots and defining what grassroots means, defining what developmental means, recreational means, competitive means, coaching education, referee. So when the opportunities, you know, arise, and it's kind of nice that I get to relive some friendships again and some collaboration. I've worked with everyone in the space that we're in now with MLS Next, and I really enjoy working with them. So it's taking all these best practices, putting them all in one room with a wealth of knowledge and talent, and elevating the game. So for a state association, I believe that we have to think differently, and we have to think of ways that we can serve all. And what I love about the MLS platform is we are, you know, inclusive. We want to try and bring as many touch points to it as possible. And I think there's a lot of connective tissue that a state association can serve in that ecosystem. So I'm echoing everything we've heard today from Noah, from Andy, and from the MLS leadership today.
Craig, maybe to pull you into the conversation, because I think it's pretty interesting. Like, you've got these competition platforms, you've got these clubs, and there's like this symbiotic relationship, right? Where there's this codependency where the competition platforms depend on the clubs, but in many respects, the clubs are often dependent on the competition platforms. How do you think about that dynamic? What questions would you pose to some of these leaders here related to that dynamic between club and competition?
It's a great question. You know, I think first and foremost, we have to define that as a relationship. right? Something that will be mutually beneficial. I think, Noah, you touched on this point a little bit earlier. I think for me, one of the things I often hear from a customer perspective of League Apps or a partner perspective is, how are their voices elevated and heard? How are their ideas incorporated into future decision making and strategy, as opposed to learning out about something that they have to adapt to? So the question for all you guys is, as you enter into this endeavor, you very much work with all of those coaches and clubs and organizations on a daily basis. What are you intentionally doing to incorporate that perspective from your member clubs?
Andy, you want to take that? Maybe Noah?
Noah, you go.
Yeah, I think I think the number one thing that we do to incorporate it is the voices of within each conference, that you're listening, you're bringing them together, you're having national meetings, you're having regional meetings, you're having localized meetings inside conferences, and you're listening. You're hearing what is important to them. Is it schedules? Is it referees? Is it fields? Is it standards? You're constantly listening. And I think that's probably the number one thing that we have done. Ryan Miller, as a commissioner, has a great relationship with everybody inside of each conference, and he chooses to listen.
I think the reason I said to Noah to go there, Craig, look, from an operations point of view, from a three-step point of view, three-step soccer, our job is to put a spotlight on the clubs, right? On the players, on the clubs. We are the very unsexy operational management team behind the scenes. That's what we do. And we want to put the spotlight on the players, development, etc. But we're good at what we do. But to Noah's point, if you listen to what the clubs need, what challenges they have, and then working in collaboration with League Apps, by the way, who've been great to work with, building things out that may not exist or improving things that do exist, our job is to try and identify how the administration duties can be made easy with no friction. If we do that well, we collaboratively, I'm talking the tech side, the other operators, listening to MLS next to what they want to achieve, what Fred wants to achieve with Louise, what Kyle needs to achieve as a GM. If we listen to all those things, I know that we have an operational structure that actually not many people have in the country, and collectively with the operators, we can deliver. Nothing will get seen. If we do our jobs well, we won't be seen. We literally will not be visual, but the game and the players and the coaches and the clubs should have a much better experience. So that's really my take on it, Marley, I'm not sure if you have a different perspective on that, but
and maybe Marley, to put a fine point on Andy's question, or as he posed it to you, some questions that we're getting from the audience. And one of the questions has to do with this idea of this fragmentation and this notion of decentralization. There's all these different things going on. So from your lens, from a state association, you see MLS, like what is that fragmentation issue is creating a challenge related to, like, what are the ways we think about the standards of how we're developing player progression? So how do you think about the way that can be overcome, right? So that clubs aren't dealing with this kind of complicated world of so many different platforms and so much decentralization?
Yeah, I think that's a very complex question. And I think there has to be more substance to defining the word fragmentation, because I think the landscape has changed. But one of the things that every group in the space is continuing to strive for is the key core components: players, coaches, referees. So I'm kind of, a little, well, what does fragmentation look like? Because every coach now has access to go take coaching courses. Every player has access to development tools. Every referee has pathways to develop he, she, they self. So I think when you talk about organization fragmentation and you're talking about league fragmentation, then that becomes more of a hot topic, right? And we can start to define what that looks like. I think when you talk about what we're doing, I don't necessarily call it unification, because we wasn't fragmented. I've worked with Andy, I've worked with Noah. It was bringing what we would call the best class operators into one space under a brand that is the strongest, most powerful men's professional league in the country, and elevating what we're doing. So I don't necessarily look at what what's going on is fragmentation. We want to be inclusive. We want to provide the tools and resources to do it. And look, like Noah said, and Andy, we welcome to speak to members, clubs, and people, because we want to help. The standards will be there, but we can't just put standards there and expect everyone to meet them. We've got to give people the tools and resources to meet those standards.
Yeah, and maybe one observation and some getaway questions here is, one thing I think that's happening across youth sports is that there is an increasing wave of consolidation, right? And one aspect of this is you have an organization with larger, with more resources. They're adopting technology, they're innovating, they're more responsive to what parents and kids need, which is fueling their growth, which then lets them get better, which lets them bring in vista and scale. So we're seeing a dynamic across different tier, whether it's competitions, whether it's operators and clubs, whether it's facilities, whether it's technology companies. You're going to continue to see a lot of change. And there was a baseball organization I was talking to, said in 5 years, there may only be 5 organizations left, and everyone will affiliate under those 5 organizations. Probably want to get to that level of extreme, but there is this shift where organizations that embrace and innovate and lead and collaborate effectively, I think we'll have more success. And organizations that were wishful of how things were, I think are going to have some more challenges. Noah, Andy, a couple of last questions. Noah, there's a question that was asked about how do you implement standards? So what's the quick way that you think about how you take the theory of standards and implement that to enforce those standards or really support those standards within the competitions like an MLS Next or EA?
Yeah, I like some of the questions coming in, and I think standards are everything. And the way in which it gets established is it's got to be obviously communicated. There's standards that are laid out, they're clear, they're concise. All the stakeholders are now held to those standards. If someone's not part of a league, they understand what the standards are in order to get into a league or to be considered for a league. If it's a standard-based league, the standards are clear. People have to live by those standards. There's got to be enforcement. Within the EA, there's a standards committee that manage the standards. So the things that are important within that league and platform are measured and managed on a week-to-week basis. There's reports given to those clubs that allow them to see how they're performing. And to the point of some of the questions, those standards do have to be upheld or you lose integrity. And then also for the clubs that are being aspirational, they need to know, okay, I've got to have these set of criteria built into our club, which then drives the success of really our nation, because we're raising the level. We're raising the level of coaches, clubs, teams, and the benefit is then the players.
Andy and Marley, I'm going to go to you for a one-sentence answer on this as we then shift to some club conversations across the country. When you think about either in your future casting, look out a year. When you think about either the opportunity or the challenge that's most top of mind when you think about the future of youth soccer, what would you describe that to be? Andy, I'll go to you first.
I think going back to the ecosystem, right? Top to bottom, Carl mentioned MLS Go, then we're talking about MLS Next. I would say those are the two, the entry point, if you like, and the current pinnacle of it. I'd like to see competitive integrity all the way down at a regional level initially. If you get that, it'll help everybody, mums, dads, players, clubs, everything. And come back to our early point, that we manage some assets on behalf of others. This would be an example of MLS Next, right? We own certain assets of our own, but if it all fits into a cohesive structure, the fluidity between players and teams going up and down as appropriate, the games become more meaningful, the pathway becomes more credible and more easy to understand for everybody, including the parents. That's what I'd like to see, a continual improvement on that. The word Marley made a good point. Fragmentation actually does allow for innovation and opportunity as well, right? Fragmentation can be friction, and it can be a road to nowhere, or actually it can be a chance for people to collaborate, as we talked about. I do think there will be a better competitive integrity and competition appropriateness in a couple of years, because we'll have created a system where that can survive. Does that make sense in terms of the overall simplicity of the way we're looking at it? I think we can be a behind the scenes part on that.
Marley, what do you think? Challenge or opportunity? What's the one thing that's top of mind?
No, I think Andy laid out, I think the only other key component is obviously technology. technology and the way we're thinking and the way we're thinking in the future. Some of the behind the scenes internal conversations we've had with you, Jeremy, is we're challenging each other to think outside of that box and bring that. And I think, you know, when you look at where we're going to be and where we're going to go, I think the game is going to be in a much sustainable place is the word I'll use, sustainable place. So I'm excited for that.
Awesome. Andy, Marley, Noah, thank you for being here as we bring in some final guests here. Appreciate that and best of luck as part of that MLS expansion. So we're going to we've got a live studio audience we're going to engage here. We also have a few folks that are joining us remote. I believe Louise and Kevin are here from the DC area and from California. And then Craig, you know, we're going to talk to kind of your brethren, people that are running these clubs around the country. I know we had a lively discussion this morning as well. And as we jump into the conversation, we're going to pop up a survey for everyone that kind of grounds the conversation as well. So, you know, and a lot of this is what's the single most important investment you might be able to make this year. So go ahead and share that, and we're going to continue to kind of circulate some data and insights. But Louise, Kevin, thank you for being here. And we've got a great group of people in the room as well that we're going to pull into this conversation. So, you know, Craig, you know, as we I'll pose the first question. Let's ladder in together on this because, you know, Louise and Kevin, and maybe we'll start with you, Kevin. When you think about what excites you most about where youth sports and youth soccer is heading, and what worries you the most, you know, you've heard some of the conversation today. What's top of mind for you in terms of worry and excitement about the future of youth soccer?
I got to unmute here. What I excited about is I think there's great opportunity, right? I think there's unlimited opportunity. The challenges get to be is the business of the soccer underneath it all, right? There's so much ego and so much business driving decision making. And at the end of the day, I've always said 99.8%, whatever that number might be, of all the players in any club across the country are not even going to play college soccer. So what's it all about at the end? And we tend to continue to focus on the top echelon players, right? And let those players and their needs drive everything across the country. And that's frustrating to me because at the end of the day, we're building memories, right? At the end of the day, and we want players going through learning life lessons while they're playing a wonderful sport and developing great life skills at the end of the day. Yeah, we want to be competitive when we go out there on Saturday and all that kind of stuff, but we don't want to be a nonprofit trying to put another nonprofit out of business, right? That's not what a nonprofit should be doing. They should be supporting each other, not trying to take their business from across the highway. That's frustrating.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think there's this interesting question because we were talking about this morning with the group in the sense that, you know, youth soccer is no longer just a game. It is a business. One thing I think is not a lot of people know how to run a business, and maybe sometimes people miss what is the business of youth soccer, which is to be in the business of youth development and community development and progression. And Louise, you know, to bring you in as someone who's been an innovator, a change maker, lots of perspectives. When you think about what's going on, especially what gets in the way of doing the things you want to be doing or could be doing, but that are obstacles that you face. I'm curious, what are the things and challenges you face, and then what excites you in terms of the best opportunities that you see?
Yeah, I think for me, the opportunities that I see today in youth soccer is we have growing participation and diversity, right? We're seeing more kids inclusive of the broader society that we have that are now playing the game. I think we have better access to licensed coaches. The licensing program and the advanced training methods, and even sports science, we're integrating within the program. So I think it's improving the clubs, and we're focusing more on the player development, not just winning. I mean, it's been so data-driven on wins, losses as metrics that we lose sight of player development. And for us internally this coming year, we're focusing on player development. You know, we're playing smaller games, short-sighted, fewer kids on the field, more touches on the ball. So that for us is a big initiative going forward into the year. I also think that there's more of an increased focus on mental health. And given what we went through with COVID, and I think the resilience, emotional resilience and leadership, life skills, and I believe that we use soccer as that vehicle that can help these kids. So it's more for us off the pitch as well as on the pitch. And I think you all know that for me, I love the women's game. I've been involved with it for numerous years. And the rates are rising. Participation rates for girls are rising. And I think the NWSL, U.S. Women's National Team, I think they're really inspiring a lot more of the younger players. And then, of course, as Julie would echo, there's more attention being paid to equity in coaching and funding. We have the opportunity, or we're grateful that we have a Michelle Kang in the NWSL that has taken women's soccer to a different level. So I'm excited about the future in youth soccer. And I think to your second point, what worries me is we still have the pay to play that dominates how we operate these clubs. The fees, the travel fees, the gear, the club fees. We need to be better at being inclusive of those in the underprivileged communities. And I think that's vital. We're seeing that this year in particular. McLean is a very wealthy area, but we have exceeded our yearly financial aid budget, and it's July 9th. So how do we become more innovative in helping these kids play and make sure that no kid is really left behind?
Thanks, Louise. I was going to ask what you was most vulnerable in your business right now, but I think you answered that when you started to talk a lot about the need for financial aid. Similar concept. If you think about the parents as your customer, right? Obviously the children, the players are ultimately the beneficiaries of the great work that you guys do as an organization. But a question for both of you, how are you evolving with societal changes in your relationship with parents as your customer? What unique aspects are you trying to bring to the table? And how has your thought process around communicating with them evolved? Kevin, over to you first.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the challenges, right? I think, historically, a lot of clubs have looked at the players as the customers, right? But the parents are the ones, writing the checks. They're the customers. Their children are the beneficiaries. And coaches, what we try to do and what we don't do well enough in our coaching education, we continue to talk about how to run formations and how to do different things on the field. But one of the things we try to really focus on at the club is getting the coaches comfortable that they get to know the players' parents, because they're working as adults for the benefit of the kid throughout the year. So they need to be on the same page. They need to know what's going on. It's healthy to have conversations with a parent every week. It doesn't have to be a formal sit down. It can be 5 minutes before practice starts and you run across a parent and hey, how's Johnny doing today? How's he doing in school? How's things going? You need to be on the same page. It's really, really important. And it's one of the things coaches probably across the board, it's one of the less enjoyable things. They just want to coach soccer and be with the kids, but this comes with it. And getting them comfortable to find the time to invest in that is very, very healthy, I think, for the club, the parents, and the players ultimately.
Louise, anything to add to Kevin's?
Yeah, I think for us, it's being more transparent in our decision-making process. Establishing those clear codes of conduct and greater involvement with parents through advisory roles and feedback forums. We've had a few town halls this year, and I think it helps build trust. And that for me is really important, that as we reevaluate our programs and what we offer, we have those parents that are high achievers, and we need to be at the core of the well-being of every kid in our program. So I think aligning ourselves with practices from some of the national and regional governing bodies will help us with compliance and long-term sustainability going forward. But I think the real key is the decision-making process, being more transparent, communicating with people in advance of implementing a particular program or a change. And I've learned that over the past 3 years as we've navigated through different alliances and partnerships about what works and what doesn't work. And it's been a learning process, if you will. So in some respects, it's been very stressful, but in other respects, it's been very valuable. So yeah, broader commitment overall to our kids and our families.
Yeah, and I think one of the threads I think throughout this is, parents are the customer, right? Youth soccer has become a business, right? Whether you're for profit or nonprofit, right? There's the ways that you have to what are you investing in, and how are you working with those customers? And many organizations I think struggle because the goal is to keep the parents away, but in reality, you've got to figure out what is that partnership model, and how does that model center not on scholarships or admission that you might not be able to control, but actually their holistic development, which is if you can develop them, that's what parents are driven most by, is a deep sense of insecurity. Are their kids going to be okay? And unfortunately, there's more things happening in our world that makes that even more fearful that parents have. What are their kids are going to be able to do for their career, the challenges, the pressures, social media, and how can sports be that potential? Louise and Kevin, I appreciate your perspective. I want to bring in some of the folks that are live here in person. So I think we're going to switch over and put some folks on the spot here that are here in person. And Craig and I have the benefit of calling people out, and then we'll continue to monitor the Q&A. But we've had interesting conversations today related to a lot of these different dynamics. And Brody, I'm going to put you on the spot first as we I think we're going to get you on camera here. And when you think about what you're doing at Steel, and you think about some of the dynamics here, what's getting in the way of we're hearing some of the challenges and the opportunities that exist. What are the biggest things that get in the way of you doing everything you want to be able to do to be able to transform and impact lives through the programs that you offer? Right, you're operating a great club programs. What are the obstacles that you're facing? What's the perspective people are often missing about what it is that you're dealing with, especially as we think about the powers that be or the people that might be able to try to do something about that?
Well, I think our biggest challenge is spreading the message or sharing what we are doing internally with the customer. So we, in our discussion earlier today, talked a lot about parent engagement and spreading what we know we're doing with what they perceive we're doing. And I think that's probably our biggest disconnect. And one of our biggest challenges is making sure that everyone is aware of what we're doing, and therefore they're in a position to make informed decisions about where they want to spend their important dollars and how they want to, benefit the lives of their children, which is ultimately what we're doing.
Anthony, from Cedar Stars, when you think about this dynamic, one thing we think about is what is the business of youth soccer? What are you in the business of doing? And what are the constraints that you guys face in operating, and how have you figured out how to overcome those constraints? And what are the pressures that you're facing that maybe other people feel, but maybe sometimes don't name or discuss?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges for youth clubs, whether that's facilities, whether that's finances, scholarships. I think as a club, you always have to be adaptable. So you can only control what you can control. So you've got to do your best with what you've got, and at the forefront, it's got to be player development. So can you invest in the right coaches, invest in the coaches as well in terms of licenses and stuff like that to try and produce the best players?
We've heard a lot about competitions, and we've heard about governing bodies and standards. What are the things that are obstacles of being able to focus on player development? Are you able to invest and do all the things you want to do, or what are the dynamics that you face that actually prevent you from doing the kind of player development work you want to do?
I think it goes back to facilities and stuff like that. I'm very privileged to work for a club that invests in facilities, so that shouldn't be an obstacle in my place. But in other places, it's definitely an obstacle. Putting 6, 7, 8 teams on a field, that's not conducive to player development, I wouldn't say. And then again, I see some clubs got 30 kids to one coach. Again, sometimes that definitely isn't conducive to player development, and getting that individual player development is very important. So, you know, there needs to be multiple coaches working with a group that size, I would say.
I don't know if we can, Zach, Mike, coming your way, buddy.
May have you stand over here, Zach, so they can.
Oh yeah, sorry, Zach.
I'm gonna sit in Mike's seat.
Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, no problem.
Appreciate you jumping in. Look, a lot's been said about obstacles, and I think one obstacle that's common to everybody currently, there's obviously been the new changes around the age definitions within the game, right? And some of them may directly affect every member in your club. They may depend upon where your alliances are and your allegiances and leagues, etc. The bottom line is that's something you've got to be adaptable to, and it's a change that, yes, has been coming, and there may have been time to prepare for it, but there's certain things that you can control and there's certain things that are out of your control as a club. And I'd love to get your perspective on how you're trying to navigate this current change internally, and what lessons have you learned from that change?
It's actually not too long ago that we dealt with it in the past, right? When they went to the calendar year from the school year. And so the period of time leading up to that and after that, there was a lot of conversations that were had about the friends, right? And playing with their friends and what that meant. We as a club decided that we were going to rip the Band-Aid off and make the changes across the board, except in specific situations where player development was the need for them to continue to play up. And so leading into the upcoming year, we've made a conscious decision to add events inside of our club where we're putting the next year's age range together, right? And so basically we're getting ahead of the relational side of things because we know how important that is to the players, right? On the female side, even more than on the male side, but you know, we need to be proactive to the change, right? And so inside of the development and inside of our programming, we actually see it as an opportunity rather than a challenge. And bringing those kids together, bringing the coaches of what the next year's team is going to look like together is just another opportunity for them to learn and grow. And developmentally, okay, well, I might have been the youngest player in receiving minimal minutes, and now I'm a leader on the team, and I've got to set the tone for what the team looks like. All of those are really great opportunities for the kids.
Matt Libber, we'll pass the mic to you. You've got a perspective, you know, Maryland Soccerplex, developed tournaments. You look at the kind of landscape in soccer today. I think there's a lot of there's this tension between you know, knowing how you like this tension between development and the business model of soccer, right? And the question ultimately is, what is the opportunity to reconcile that? When you look at it from your perspective, and someone put a comment in the chat as a question, you know, we have a pay to play model, right? Ultimately, people are investing as part of this. There's not going to be government subsidies that are enabling this. So what is your sense of how you reconcile the business model with the idea of offering the right kind of soccer experiences? What's that tension, and what's the opportunity to overcome that tension for any organization?
I mean, the tension's there. I think Kevin talked about it before. Andy mentioned it. I think a lot of the kids in the middle are getting lost. We have really good rec programs in the country. We have really good elite level programs. It's the kids in the middle that get lost, and they're the ones that drop out of the sport. It's not fun for them anymore. They're not trying to play in college. Their friends aren't playing with anymore. So you have to figure out a means to do that. You know, one of the things we do at the Soccerplex, and I say this with, you know, all irony knowing it, we're one of the more expensive places to play in the country. We do that to supplement our recreational program. We do it to raise scholarship money so more kids can play that just want to be out there and play for fun. We have to find models like that can do it, and try and find the subsidies, find the corporate sponsorships, find the government grants and things like that are available to us that are out there. You just got to go find them, and it makes it harder. So doing things like that and having a grant writer on your staff that can go after that stuff is important, or have somebody that you can go to that knows how to do that. And then owning your own programming and not having to outsource as much as you can keep the money in your program to give you more flexibility to do what you want with it. It's just some of the things that you can look at to do.
You know, Craig, and I know we'll pull some more folks in questions, but you have a perspective on this. You talk to leaders all the time. It seems like there's this challenge where people are charging a lot of money. parents are spending a lot of money. That creates lots of high expectations.
Yep.
But it's not like, people have all these parking lots that are set aside for their Ferrari and Lamborghini for running their club, right? Like at the end of the day, there's not a lot of margin that's left over. So what's the trap and dynamic that you see that the clubs are in? What do you think is what's the escape from that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd put it in the context of it's probably no different than any other business, right? And I think where the sport is at these days, when you've got overhead, you've got staff you need to pay, you've got bills with facilities, you have to look at it through the lens of a business, right? And you have to understand what the ROI is on all of your decisions in the future. So that's the problem, right? There's constraint with that. To be inclusive, you don't want to drive up cost, right? You want to be very, very mindful of your price point within your particular market. You want to be inclusive. You want to accommodate as many players as you can that perhaps need to be supported in their endeavor to play the game. So I'd love to say there's a magic wand where that could all change. There probably isn't, right? A magic wand where that could all change, unless all of a sudden, we have government investment into the sport that can offset, et cetera, et cetera. I think the challenge it presents for people in the room and probably a lot of people online today is most people probably got into these positions being a coach or being passionate about being a coach, right? And there's been a kind of a progressive structure. I think the challenge is for everybody in this room to bring new skills to their own toolkit to be able to lead that organization in a very, very positive way. So it's a moment that we've all got to recognize as real. And it's a moment that we've all probably got to talk to one another, over communicate, and not be afraid to be collaborative. One of the things I loved earlier that Kyle was saying in this show is, be solution orientated. Well, you could argue that MLS looked at that and said, right, we want to be solution orientated because we want to bring in a new league structure to do that. How did they solve the problem, right? They went and sourced 5 operators to enable them to do that, right? So I think you've got to plot through these things with certain stages and be very intentional if you want to actually minimize some of these obstacles that you face on a day-to-day basis. So look, at the end of the day, I think players deserve the opportunity, and that's just going to mean that everybody has got to be, we use this term a lot, innovative, creative, roll their sleeves up, be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And I think the brain power, the collective brain power, and the passion from people will ultimately lead us to the right answers.
Yeah, one place of investigation I think can be just what is the way to align the business model with development.
Yeah,
I think about karate. I think about the Karate Kid. I was trying to explain to my kid that no, we're not going to watch the Will Smith kids version, like the original one with Mr. Miyagi. And but when I was talking to someone about karate the other day, because most of karate when you're going is not actually oriented around tournaments, right? It's you're coming in and you're paying a subscription to come into class to learn. And then ultimately you have a test to get a brown belt. And after 2 years, then you have a test to become a black belt.
Yeah.
And while there is some competition element to it, fundamentally, you're actually, your parents are investing in a way that's aligned with progression and aligned with development. And where competition is an element of that progression, but it's only an element of that. And I think that is an interesting question that I see across different sports, different operators that are starting to innovate around more membership-based models that allow them to have the resources to reinvest, as opposed to a competition model that really challenges them and figuring out the right balance. And I'm looking at Eddie now. So,
Eddie, before you come in, I would just like to add on the karate kind of concept is, we had a discussion this morning and the conversation was raised around, where's your break-even point on a lot of your programming, right? And then if you can add one extra player, right, that can make the difference very much in ultimately the P&L, if you like, of a particular program. I think whilst we quite often strive for we've got to do things differently, sometimes the answer is already in what we have, right? There's a lot of great people who've contributed to the success of clubs and the success of games. And I think if you just look at the individual P&L a lot of the time of your programming, what would it do to your business if you could add 1 or 2 more players to every existing program you have, right? Without diminishing the quality, the coaching ratio, right? The level of return for the players. In some ways, it might even increase the enjoyment for them because there's more players and it's a more vibrant environment. So I would encourage everybody, as you're stepping through innovation, to also not let go of what you've worked hard to build, right? I think sometimes just tweaking what you've already got in place can actually lead you to a lot more successful outcomes.
Eddie, I've always found you really thoughtful and insightful, and as you listen to the conversation today, as you think about the future of soccer, what is the thing that, what is the biggest concerns or obstacles that you see, and what's the biggest opportunity you see as you kind of navigate this as a leading club, where there's immense opportunity, but there's a lot of things that get in the way.
Thank you for the comment.
A big
being thoughtful.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure that's true all the time, but let's start with opportunity and something that's reinforced in the conversations that I heard around the table this morning is a reminder for us to project, not to sell, but to, okay, I'm going to say market what we actually, I believe, do for children, right? It is not just about their aspiration to play professionals, because I think everybody wants to be a pro in the beginning, right? I think everybody does. But as I've, spanned time and watched kids grow up, I've seen what it does for their character. I see the results they get from committing and staying with something for a long time, the relationships they build lifelong with friends, right? That's remarkable. And I think we don't tend to make that the top bit sometimes for parents who are our customers. The challenges are endless. I think the fragmentation that was referred to earlier, I would love to see an opportunity for the best players, if you will, to be in the same league, to have a venue at least once a year to compete against one another. And by the way, that could be at every level. It could be regional. It could be local. I love the interclub competitions. And finally, coming from New York City, it's facilities, finding ways to get more kids on the field while still being able to develop in the ways that I think all coaches would like to have. So thank you.
I appreciate that perspective. And, I want to invite John and Jerome from East Coast Surf, and I'll throw the question to both of you and you can figure out who wants to take it. One thing, there's a lot of people that are listening to this that, and I'm going to put others on the spot too, that there are people from governing bodies, from leadership organizations, and in many respects, sometimes I often find there's a missing perspective from the people that are actually doing the work. So what is the stuff that people are missing that are making a lot of decisions right now, right? The changes, the governance, whatever it may be. And I may put John on the spot because he's very brash. If John wants to jump on next to Anthony and maybe move, if you can move next to Anthony for a second, what sometimes people are missing about the reality of a club and how you're operating, what's going on, that you wish decision makers would maybe account for or take your perspective?
Thanks, Jerome, for letting me take this. No, I think a lot of times Craig kind of said it that my Ferrari and Porsche aren't parked next to my $2 million mansion. The cost of youth soccer goes up every year, and obviously the market we're in, the tri-state area, the cost of facilities rises every single year, whether that's the field, whether it's the lights, whether it's tournaments, whether it's coaches, whether it's equipment. It's an escalating expense. And just to kind of keep up with the cost, you do need to raise price, because at the same time, I think actually Louise said it best, there's the other financial piece of the underprivileged kids that you have to take account for. And while we do live in one of the wealthier markets in the country, there are still economic problems for some of our clientele that we have to kind of balance as well. So while the costs may sometimes seem like they're a lot, they don't actually always meet the P&L sheet. And that's where other programming comes into play, whether it's camps, whether it's clinics, whether it's speed and agility, other things you can do to help the club maintain a good P&L. But at the same time, I think that until other organizations can help us get a maybe fixed cost, if that makes sense, we're all going to continue to have to raise prices, because every year you look, something goes up, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, that reality. And one thing I just want to point out, and we'll talk a little bit about technology, and then maybe have a wrap up question for anyone about what solutions or opportunities they see. Is, there's a lot of questions that's coming through in the Q&A about pay to play model. What does it mean? Soccer organizations are a nonprofit, or are they not? I think in a lot of the cases, this nomenclature really misses the reality, right? That fundamentally, we don't talk about like pay for education model, right? There's models, there are public schools, there's private schools, there's different models, right? In some cases, you might be in a subsidized program that's being paid by the government or through tax dollars. In some cases, it's people paying directly. I think the real question is no matter what that model is the business model you're in allowing you to deliver the value proposition that you want to be delivering, and what gets in the way of that, right? And so one thing I hear is that there are a lot of people that are forced into, there's a lot of input costs, the coaching, the travel, the facilities, that therefore drives up prices. And at the same time, though, that affects your ability to provide inclusivity. So I think fundamentally youth sports is just accepting the reality that it's an economy, but it's an economy that's working for very few. Right. And if it's an economy that's working very, very few, how do we re-examine the structures, the dynamics, the things that are getting in the way, so that ultimately families and parents and kids are getting what they want out of that experience, and the people that are delivering it can deliver it the way that they know that they want to deliver it. I mean, Christophe, I'm going to ask you to come into the conversation. One thing that has not come up often enough today, but will increasingly be in these conversations that will continue, is around technology and AI, because that is going to be continually to change the world, and maybe stand up so that they can see through this. You're the Chief Product Technology Officer at League Apps. Fortunately now, you've experienced leading Vimeo and Skillshare in key roles, and as you think about technology and AI, as we talk about forces of change, what impact do you think that could have in the world of youth soccer? What are you anticipating? What should people think about?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is going to have a tremendous impact all around us, and youth sports specifically. It's moving really fast as well. So things that were not possible a month ago now are possible. You used to see 6 fingers on hands. Now that's been fixed. But in general, the way I'm seeing it is first, you're going to see more efficiency. Things like scheduling, things like building a team with 2,000 players. Those are going to get a lot easier to do with AI. They're going to take all these kind of heuristics that you created and be able to spit out an output. But what's really exciting is that the compute power that you're getting from AI is going to give you insights that you couldn't really do before. You're getting all this data collection from video, from wearables, that can be aggregated in one place. And then those insights that AI can produce are going to actually help player development. So that at the end of this actually can make it more human and enable coaches to spend more time with the players and help develop them more. So it's really exciting to see how it can make businesses more efficient, but then also really add to the game as well.
Thank you, Christophe. And I think AI is certainly something to watch. And I think it's going to have profound effects on everyone, not just your organizations, but in the people in your organization, their kids. It's shifting and changing a lot of expectations. As we get away and get ready to wrap here, Craig, you pick maybe 1 or 2 people to put on the spot as we think about kind of a getaway question here. I know we got Louise and Kevin always ready to share their expectations. Some of the folks here, what's some of the last things that you want to kind of conclude with in terms of the questions you want to make sure we surface before we go?
Yeah, I think, look, none of this happens, right? None of this happens without the investment of time and energy from the folks in this room, the folks who have joined us virtually. And I think it's important to recognize that commitment that those individuals make to make this happen, right? Yes, people can benefit from this from a career perspective or a business perspective. But the investment of time and energy for folks is really something that you have to commit to being a lifestyle choice. And I think sometimes when you're in those moments and you're really challenged, right, and you're trying to figure out which player makes a team, doesn't make a team, you're making real tough individual decisions. I think it's important to recognize that there's a whole bunch of folks in that same boat as you, and that is a real opportunity to learn from them. So I want to take it back to Kevin and Louise quickly to close things out on a positive note. And I'd love to get your point of view on why you do this. What motivates you, why you do this, and why have you made this your career choice? Because I think it's important for everybody to be energized. Without that energy, we can't solve the problems we've highlighted today.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always been a passion. I believe that with any job that anyone works in, there should be a deep-rooted passion for what you do. If that passion is not there, then why are you putting in the hours? We still laugh in my family. I've been doing this involved since maybe 1985, 1986. And I've seen so many changes in the game from the grassroots level to the professional level, to the tournament experience, the increase in the fees. We're always adapting. We have to adapt to change and be resilient. There's still a joke in my family that for years, people didn't know that I was married. And we bought my husband a shirt, and on the back, we just put Louise's husband. And he wore it around at all the tournaments that we were involved in. But it was with love and appreciation. It was not in any way a negative connotation about that. So I'm still doing this. I love the results when I walk out to a field on Saturday and say, how did we put 3,000 kids on a field? Or how did we make this happen with so very few of us that manage the operations of a club? How do we build $4 million budgets and turn a profit every year, or even just be in the black? Like, what are we doing right? So we break that down. We talk about the data and the technology, and we do use those tools to evaluate how we monitor our progress. We collect the feedback. We're in a situation where we rely on player registration, and we've seen an attrition. I would guess that many clubs are seeing an attrition in numbers. So how do we modify that to fit within our budgets? And as Kevin said, keep people happy. How do we pay the coaches who want more money? How do we pay for benefits that continually rise? So it's a holistic view that I think we try to take of how we're running this club.
I love that, Louise. And Kevin, maybe get away as we wrap. What's your why? Give us your one sentence. Like, what's your why? Why do you do this?
I simply do it because it's a passion to have as much impact on as many kids as possible. I've been fortunate to be in this business for many, many years at different levels, and I've never truly felt like I have a job. I've never looked at when's lunch, or what time can I go home, or, I've worked 7 days a week. It's a passion, and the ability to have the impact on as many lives as possible is really a passion of mine.
As we wrap, I think one thing I'll just acknowledge is, and I think Craig alluded to it, if you just think about the number of kids and lives that are going to be impacted by the people listening to this, the people that are involved in youth soccer, the opportunity to transform lives and communities is profound. And there's a huge amount of opportunity. And the one thing we can be certain of is there will be change. There's a lot of forces of change that are happening. And one of the quotes I really like is, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. Right. And I think there's a collective opportunity for that invention. Certainly what we want League Apps to be part of, and how we want to continue to surface this. There'll be more conversations to come as we want to figure out how to engage people, and because none of us have the answers, but that means just all of us have the answers. So a lot of the topics that surface here, AI, competition models, standards, the business models, coaching, facilities, all those things are topics over the coming weeks and months where you're going to navigate as well. And so with that, as much as this may not feel like work, and you may not realize you have lunch, people do have lunch to get to. I know we got a big soccer match as well today, and more things to come. Looking forward to a bright future, especially being led by all of you all. This is Jeremy Goldberg, Craig McGinn signing off. Thank you for being part of this town hall.
Thank you.